What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G. Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking the Charlotte Flair episode of Broken Skull Sessions from way back when on August 19th, 2022. This is the last of the batch that I had yet to watch up until lately. I was very behind, as you guys probably know if you follow this show, on the Broken Skull Sessions episodes. I had to go back and watch the Cody Rhodes one, the Bully Ray one, Jeff Jarrett, Sami Zayn, and now finally Charlotte Flair. I will say this, though, I think this was probably the weakest one of those five. Not to say it was a bad episode, not a bad show, well worth checking out. It's one of the shorter ones at around an hour, 20 minutes. It's just not as interesting. They don't have the same chemistry as Steve did with Jeff and with Cody and with a few of the other people. The stories weren't as... we've heard a lot of these stories before, and maybe it's because, he's had Charlotte on his podcast, I'm sure before, years ago on his, Steve Austin Unleashed Podcast 1 show. He also had her on, it was very brief, it was nothing like this, it was not nearly as detailed, but he had her on that show, Steve Austin, I don't even remember what it was called, Broken Skull something, Straight Up Steve Austin on USA Network. I think she was on the second season, which I reviewed here on the show. I think that was either late 2020, early 2021, if I'm not mistaken. So they've had a lot of interaction. Charlotte's always a weird interview. I've spoken to her a few times myself. She's great. She's a very nice person. And I think a lot of people don't think that because they see the character on TV. We don't see her out of character a lot, but she's just genuinely nice from what I can gather. She's very awkward at certain points, and not to say that I'm not awkward, but just when it comes to interviews and stuff like that, she can't answer things with a full thought, or I don't know, it's a little weird, and that was on full display in this interview. It honestly reminded me a little bit, not quite nearly as much of a mess, but the Paige interview that Steve Austin did, not on this show, but that original, whatever it was, the podcast that he had originally here on the network or on Peacock, whatever, years ago, and it was just a disaster. Paige was very awkward, it was just very strange. Again, this wasn't quite as awkward as the Dean Ambrose one either. Just not great, but it was still enjoyable, and I did learn a few things from Charlotte speaking here, and I thought it was enjoyable overall, as I said. So they start off the episode talking about how Charlotte got married to Andrade in his hometown of Mexico. Not hometown of Mexico, that's stupid. Hometown in Mexico, which I'm not sure if she said where he was from in Mexico, but they got married there. She's been enjoying marriage, and they went on their honeymoon in Costa Rica. Their honeymoon was a while ago. They got married quite a while ago. I think in June, maybe. She's taken time off since May. And Andrade went back to AEW TV soon after. She's been off ever since. I don't know. I don't think it's an injury thing. This was recorded, I would assume, in July. This went up in August, and it's probably just because they either have nothing for her right now or she just wants to take time off. I assume it's the latter, but who knows? I can't imagine keeping Charlotte off TV for an extended period of time. It's Charlotte Flair, although I'm not complaining. It is nice to have a bit of a break from the Charlotte character. She's on TV constantly. She is absolutely overexposed. So anyway, she talks about how Andrade is her best friend and whatever, and she's in WWE because of her brother, Reed. And again, she's told this story a lot, but it's still very interesting about how when she first, expressed interest in becoming a wrestler, Triple H really asked her, listen, do you really want to do this? I can't promise you that I'll help your brother as well. And she said, yeah. She already had the athletic background, so it was a bit of a handout because she was Ric Flair's daughter, but, she didn't come from the independent scene. She didn't even really know what the independent scene was, she said. But, it was tough, and she wanted to do it and give it a shot. And she did it because her and her brother were so competitive, and she wanted to follow in her father's footsteps, whatever. She also talks growing up with Ric Flair as her father. She did a lot of sports, basketball and volleyball. Ric loved basketball, but she chose volleyball to do as what she thought would be a career, I guess, coming out of high school. And I think she got a full scholarship with that going to college. She finished college, but, she quit volleyball her third year there, and she said that she lost who she was. She didn't have any goals. She talks about being at the 2012 Hall of Fame ceremony, not when Ric was inducted in 2008 and retired that same weekend, but when the Horsemen were inducted in 2012 as a group. And they were out at dinner. I forgot who it was, either Michael Hayes or one of the producers or whatever. And they asked her about, when are you going to get into the business? And I think she said that person had asked that probably just to kind of drive further, even more of a wedge between her and Reed, because they were very competitive, and Reed was the big wrestling fan. And he goes, you're going to get into the business? And she's like, I haven't really thought about it. And one thing led to another. She reported to FCW 2 months later. She mentions here, interestingly, that she was Canyon Ceman's first hire. Now, I don't know how accurate that is because Sami Zayn literally just said the exact same thing on the last episode. Sami Zayn mentioned that he was the first hire of Canyon Ceman. There can only be one hire unless he was the first wrestling hire and she was the first athletic hire because she didn't come to the independent scene. I don't know, but I thought that was interesting. They were both hired in 2012, though. She said that he told her that he would not be giving her any handouts despite the fact she was Ric Flair's daughter. I guess she called Reed in September of that year of 2012, and he was annoyed by the fact that she didn't know the names of any of the producers, people like Norman Smiley and the trainers and whatever, because he was a big wrestling fan. He left for Japan to do more wrestling stuff, and I guess he invited her home for Thanksgiving that November, and she declined so she could further train in Florida. And they had a bit of I don't want to say a strained relationship, but they were very competitive. And it was more so due to the fact she said that he was back on his addiction at that point, the drug addiction and whatever. And it really bothered her. And I guess he asked her to tweet some of his stuff or retweet some of his stuff on Twitter, like promoting a match or something. And she said no, because she was really mad at him about his addiction. Couple of months later, Rick was going to fly him home for Charlotte's Access shows. It was her first time in a ring on Access that weekend, WrestleMania 29 weekend. He died that night, she said, which is crazy. She went back to work a week later. She cut a promo for Dusty in promo class about Reed, and I guess that was really like the breakthrough for her or whatever. She mentioned how greatly their parents were affected by this and how she was the one who drove Ric Flair to rehab, and she mentions how they really haven't spoken publicly a lot about the whole rehab thing and, just that whole process, that whole weird time for the Flair family. Flair was on that WWE 2K14 panel like a couple of months later, and that was what actually got Jim Ross fired from WWE because Ric Flair was kind of flying off the handle. He was obviously intoxicated, saying stuff that he shouldn't have, and Jim Ross was the MC. He got canned. Ric Flair, I don't know if I think he was under a Legends deal at that point. I don't think he was affected at all. I'm not sure when he was back on TV after that. But anyway, it was a pretty dark time for the entire family, as you can imagine. She saw Paige as the next big thing when she was in FCW. She learned from not really as much, she said, from the women that came before her, but from the women that she came up with. Not only just Paige, but largely Bayley, Sasha, and Becky, the women she was working with at that time. From a trainer perspective, she learned a lot from Dusty Rhodes, Sarah Amato, Norman Smiley. She was a lot specifically closer with Becky Lynch, and she also mentions Emma, too. She mentions Emma was her first match. I don't know if she said TV match or match just in general. I'm not sure, but she was pretty close with Emma. And hearing her say that, I totally forgot about Emma Tenille Dashwood. She just left Impact a couple of months ago. I would not be definitely at all opposed to her coming back to WWE, but specifically on SmackDown. And then the SmackDown women's division could really use her right now. Raw just got Candice LeRae. Not that Tenille Dashwood would be this massive star on SmackDown, but they could use more established, experienced women on that show. And not that she would be a game changer by any means, but I would like to see her back. I think that'd be cool. So anyway, she talks about, or they rewatch before talking about anything else, a FCW promo that she cut in promo class shortly after arriving in WWE in their developmental system. This was well before NXT was what it became. I mean, it was around the time they were filming stuff at Full Sail, so it was before the PC, though. It was from July of 2012, and she said after the fact, and nothing of what she said in that promo was untrue, but she paid respect to everyone there and talked about her journey, being Ric Flair's daughter and whatever, and she came across very well. She mentioned that the big part of that promo was just wanting to be liked, and that was a big thing for her up until really a few years ago, and she hasn't really cared as much about that in recent years. She wonders why she did it, why she ever really bothered and worried about that in the first place. She talks about being a natural heel, and it's hard to come across as relatable when she's, just being Ric Flair's daughter as a babyface. And I agree. The funny thing is that, like I said earlier, any interaction that I've had with Charlotte has been very positive. She's a very sweet person, very cool, very down to earth. The problem with someone like that, as she says here, is that person does not translate well to a wrestling character. It's boring. So she makes a great point. Like, I'm thinking, when I've interviewed her, I'm thinking, why don't we see this Charlotte on TV? It's because it just doesn't make for a great WWE superstar. So that's why she's such a great heel. But anyway, they rewatched the TakeOver match against Natalya to crown where she won the NXT Women's Championship in May of 2014. She mentions having the 2016 feud of the year with Sasha Banks, and she really didn't start to go off her instincts in the ring until around Survivor Series 2018 in the match against Ronda Rousey. She goes back to the NXT stuff. She wanted to show Triple H that she could take care of NXT, that she could be the leader of that women's division and really take it in as her own. She talks about the mindset between being in NXT, the main roster, and how competitive they were, and they weren't doing it intentionally. She doesn't really know exactly what triggered the main roster to be more competitive. She mentioned Nikki Bella when she first started feuding with her in late 2015 over the Divas Championship. Nikki was very hungry, and to her credit, Nikki improved a lot towards the end of her career. Both her and Brie both. I was never the biggest Bella Twins fan, but they both got a lot better in the ring than they were years earlier. And I think the competitive nature of the women in NXT, whether they were doing it intentionally or not, definitely triggered that and caused the main roster women that were already there to step up their game. And she mentions that as well about how we weren't here to start a revolution. Like, that wasn't intentional. That just kind of came organically, which was what made it so great, starting in 2015, 2016. They rewatched the WrestleMania 32 triple threat match that she had with Becky Lynch and with Sasha Banks, and they knew they needed to steal the show. They knew they needed this opportunity, and they knew it needed to go well in order to get other opportunities. And I thought it was very interesting when they show the spot where she hit the moonsault on Becky and Sasha on the outside. She connected with that one, but as she's going to the top rope, she kind of looks away. Not in the match, but while she's watching it here. And Steve laughs and says, "What have I told you about this?" And I guess Steve has probably told her, listen, either don't fucking do the moonsault or just do it better. The actual moonsault, the air she gets is great. She never fucking lands it, and it never looks good. She always lands on the side or whatever, over rotates. I don't know, not over rotates, but does it over the opponent, whatever it might be. It just never looks good. It just never looks good. And if anyone's going to tell someone to stop doing something, it's Steve Austin. He said the same thing to John Cena years ago. He was like, listen, dude, you got to fucking stiffen up that STF. It looks like shit. You got to stop doing that. And anyway, she mentions how when she won the Women's Championship that night at WrestleMania 32, she felt ready compared to when she won the Divas Championship only months earlier in late 2015. She did not feel ready. Ric Flair gives her a lot of criticism and advice. She mentions that they butt heads a lot on that sort of stuff. He doesn't always know what he's talking about. He is Ric fucking Flair, but at the same time, he'll tell her to do certain things, and she's like, no, that doesn't make sense. You never did that in your prime, so why should I do it? And she mentions that she has more of an athletic edge than Flair ever did, which is true, given her background in sports and athletics and whatever. Anyway, so she learned what not to do on the road from her father, which was very smart, and she also makes the comment that she has kept all of her robes, which I thought was funny as well. All of her robes, that is, compared to Flair, or Rick rather, selling all of his. She mentions how she learned how to be a star from watching Nikki Bella. They also rewatched the WrestleMania 34 match against Asuka for the SmackDown Women's Championship, beating Asuka, retaining the title, and handing Asuka her first loss in WWE. She mentions while they're watching the match that she really wishes Asuka had a mean mouthpiece and just let Asuka be the silent badass killer. It honestly is amazing in 5 years that Asuka's been on the main roster. I mean, I can't say she's never had a mouthpiece because she did very briefly with Paige. The problem was that Paige was a very weird fit for those two, and it just, that never really worked, although I was excited for it early on. It was a bit of a weird pairing. Asuka, it's weird, her English isn't bad, but especially in recent years, she can certainly speak, but, what they've had her saying and the over-the-top shit, I don't know if that's her idea, if that's an Asuka idea, or if that's WWE, or it was a Vince thing, I don't know. She still does it now, even with Triple H in charge. It's fucking awful. It is terrible. The over-the-top bullshit they have Asuka say, or whatever she says herself, is not good, and not even what she's saying, but, just ranting and stuff. And it's not even the fact that it's in Japanese, just what they have her doing and acting crazy all the time. It's not intimidating. It's not entertaining. It's just stupid. And I agree with Charlotte. I feel like if she had a mouthpiece and she was a badass silent heel, it would work 10 times better. And Asuka was perfectly fine in NXT and early on in the main roster. They just kind of lost that magic somewhere along the way, but that's neither here nor there in this interview. She also credits Fit Finlay for really helping her progression as a performer. And they also talk about how I guess 2 days later, obviously, a couple days later on SmackDown, she lost the championship via a cash-in to Carmella. And she says, in retrospect, I probably would have questioned that. And listen, it was Carmella's time to become champion, but having Charlotte end Asuka's streak and then having Charlotte lose immediately afterward was definitely dumb. She mentions being naturally competitive. Austin tells this story of Arn telling him that he had a bad dropkick. Apparently, it's a famous story. I'm sure I've heard it before. I just don't remember, but they kind of joke about Arn. Arn used to say to her, and just in general, that no one can have the talent, the body, and the promo. No one can have all three. And she wondered why. She would ask him, why can't someone have all three? Why can't I have all three? And she feels like she does have all three. And it's different with women. They talk about the whole body thing. It is a weird concept with wrestlers and whatever. But anyway, as far as Becky Lynch goes, he brings up Becky. Charlotte mentions that they went through different courses in life. She became a wife and a mother. And Charlotte met Manny, that being Andrade, and they kind of went their separate ways a little bit, not as nearly as close as they once were, and they both want to be the best, and she mentions that. They rewatched the Evolution match from 2018 with Becky Lynch, the last woman standing match, which was great, and she wishes that she didn't change what made her popular, as far as when she went babyface, changing those heel mannerisms and being that same heel just as a babyface. She wished she didn't change that back then. The Rousey match, as far as the one that happened at Survivor Series in 2018, obviously had no build. It happened out of nowhere. And her first thought was that she had lost a WrestleMania match because that was the match that had been rumored for, I don't know if it was internally discussed, like with her and whatever. I'm sure the talent are like the last people to find out about this sort of stuff. But it was internally rumored for many, many months, dating back to before WrestleMania in 2018. That Ronda and Charlotte was like the WrestleMania match they were building to the following year, in the main event no less. So in giving it away on such short notice at Survivor Series, she thought, fuck, there goes my WrestleMania match. And also knowing how hot Becky got after that one angle on Raw days earlier, that probably wasn't as much in her mind, but she thought they just gave away the WrestleMania match. And they kind of did. But she wanted to show in that match that she deserved it. That she deserved that spot, and she couldn't have asked for a better match with Ronda. And it was a really, really good match. I thought the WrestleMania Backlash match from this year, I was there for that one, the I Quit match. I actually thought that was pretty good. I thought the Survivor Series match was better, but that was still better than the WrestleMania match itself from 38 this year, which was not good in my opinion. Was not overly great at all. So they talk about like the WrestleMania plans and how it kind of came to be for 35. So she loses the Rumble. She says Becky should have won the Rumble, and she did. Vince told her at TV like that Monday or soon after that she would be inserted into the Mania main event. And Steve and Charlotte were on kind of different wavelengths with this. Steve even mentions, I know you're not making the calls, you're not booking your shit here, but that he basically says that was fucking dumb. It didn't really make a lot of sense. Charlotte was looking at it from the perspective of, I'm glad it happened that way. And obviously, I mean, no shit she wants to be in the main event. She always feels she should be, as every performer should, so I get it. Charlotte's perspective was, I'm fine that it happened, but I really wish there was follow-up on that. I wish they followed up on the hatred people had for me coming out of Mania. Like, she wanted to be a part of, like, the Authority or whatever and all this other sort of shit. She thought it would have been cool to really capitalize on that, and she jokes that she's in all these triple threats. She was in the triple threat at WrestleMania 32, a triple threat at WrestleMania 35. She was in a triple threat at SummerSlam 2018, SummerSlam 2021. She's in a lot of fucking triple threats, is Charlotte Flair. And multi-women matches, too, in NXT. She was in a multi-women's match at WrestleMania 33 and a lot of these other shows. It happens a lot with her. Anyway, so they talk about the WrestleMania 35 main event and how satisfying it was to be in the main event of that show, and she just wants more. She talks about how she's Ric Flair's biggest cheerleader, her father's biggest cheerleader, and vice versa. They talk about the title swap from last October, almost exactly a year ago, and how she didn't do anything on purpose. It was dropping the belt, she said, was completely on accident. A lot of people have questioned that. I'm not sure if I believe it, but that's her side of the story. At least they talked about it. She said that she would not have picked up the belt herself. She did pick up the belt, and because Sonya told her to, like, in character, but she was like, in retrospect, I wish I didn't, because my character would never do that. It was very fucking weird. The whole segment was bizarre. It was just not a good segment. She mentions as far, because Steve asks her, like, oh, are you and Becky on good terms now? She doesn't answer the question really, but I think she may have taken it a different way. She goes, you know, Becky has a husband now, she has a kid, and seeing what she's doing and bringing the whole family along, I want that one day. Doesn't answer Steve's question, but it was interesting. And she says that she wants to have kids one day as well when the time is right. I'm glad Steve brought up the Sasha Banks and Naomi thing. Now, I assume this was filmed in like July, June, whatever. This went up in August. Maybe early August. I assume it was filmed in June because they don't talk about Vince at all and Vince leaving and whatever. So I'm sure he would have asked about that if this was recorded around the time Vince retired. But anyway, he did ask about Sasha and Naomi. And she says, I took time off right after WrestleMania Backlash. They walked out. I think they walked out like that next day or something. I'm pretty sure their last day at Raw was 8 days later, if I'm not mistaken. So she mentions, I wasn't there, so I can't comment on exactly what happened or whatever, but she does say she can't imagine never wrestling Sasha again. And she also mentioned that she and Naomi have unfinished business. They had a great match on SmackDown, which they did. It's a very good match on SmackDown earlier this year. And it kind of came together via a coincidence, and they made the most of the opportunity because it wasn't really meant to happen. But they made the most of it, and it was a great match. As far as her goals and whatever, she always wants to be on top. Everyone's thinking, of course she does. She books her own shit, which she doesn't. Does she pull strings? I'm sure. She's been there for a long time. I'm sure she has some leeway. But always wanted to be on top. You're an idiot if you say otherwise. She wishes the Backlash match that she had with Ronda, like I mentioned earlier, which was a lot better than the Mania one. She wishes that was the Mania match because they tried for the Mania match to be perfect, and it wasn't. And at least she left on a high at Backlash, she said. She was really happy about that. She jokes about Rhea wanted to probably beat her and get her win back, which she fucking should. It's actually criminal that I'm not blaming Charlotte, but the fact that Charlotte beat Rhea as many times as she did between 2020 and 2021 and Rhea never got that win back is fucking ridiculous. Oh, what a long-term story. Give me a break. She also wants to work with Belair when she comes back, Liv Morgan. She does want to come back with a different layer, though. That I thought was interesting. She wants to stay heel. Thank God. Hopefully Triple H books her as such. Booking her as a babyface would be fucking dumb. And she wants to evolve. She just doesn't know how that's going to look when she comes back. She doesn't know how to do it. She doesn't like to dwell on her bad matches. She always does. Whenever she has a bad performance, she always dwells on it, but she shouldn't. She recognizes. She talks Ric Flair being proud of her and how she came back last year and didn't woo. That was part of being the opportunity. That was the nickname she bestowed upon herself, and that was part of the character change. She takes being called a workhorse by Steve a compliment, and she likes having breaks every once in a while. This one was, her own choice. The one in 2020, I think, was because of that busted breast implant, and then she had surgery again. So that was a health thing, I think. This one was entirely because I think she wanted to. Obviously, she got married and had the honeymoon, but, the honeymoon was over months ago. She's just off now, probably because she wants to, and I don't blame her. Having that break makes sense. Also, if there's nothing for her to do that makes sense, then keeping her off TV also makes sense, and I'm sure she will be back soon. She could be back within the next couple of weeks, honestly. She also wonders what's next for her. That was kind of the note they ended on here. And that was it. This was a good show, like I said, definitely probably the weakest one of all the ones I've talked about lately. The Cody one was better. Even the Bully Ray one was better. Jeff Jarrett was great. Sami Zayn was awesome. This was not bad. They just weren't on the same page for a lot of the questions, and the chemistry was a little weird, although you could tell they're close. Charlotte is just an awkward interview, and I appreciate the fact that it's not all scripted. She's not a robot. She's not a robot. Everything she says, she's just making human error, as I do fucking talking about this shit, obviously, all the time, so who am I to say? It's just, wasn't the most compelling conversation compared to others that Steve had here on Broken Skull Sessions, but it was still an enjoyable hour, 20 minutes, and I did learn some new stuff, so I would recommend checking it out. Hopefully it's not long before we get another one of these. They were doing them monthly for a while. The last one where we didn't have, the last month before September, which we didn't get a new one in September of this year, before September of this year, the last month to not have a Broken Skull Sessions was like last October. We've had Lita since then, and Becky Lynch, and Steve has officially had on all the 4 horsewomen. He's had Lita on this year, Charlotte, Sammy, all the people I've reviewed lately. And who else? Ron Simmons, I think, back in February, among other people. So, he's had a lot of great guests. I'm surprised that we haven't heard who his next guest is going to be. Hopefully it's not long before Steve has another episode here on Peacock or the network, wherever you're watching this sort of stuff. So that's going to do it, guys, for my review here today. Thank you for checking it out. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Also, hit the bell button as well to be notified every time a new video goes up. Have an awesome one, guys. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.